And we're going to try to sing over them all doing the chorus.
10 years ago, this United Church in Toronto's West End was empty, dying, like many inner-city churches. Now, it's not full, but there is new life here. The parishioners are a little different in this church. Crack addicts and prostitutes worship next to parents and kids. Reverend Cheri DiNovo didn't evangelize. Instead, she walked out into the streets, found those on the margins. Cheri DiNovo calls the drug addicts and the homeless prophets, says they bring faith to the church. She wrote about them in her book, Queerifying Evangelism. In 2001, Reverend Cheri DiNovo performed the first legally recognized gay marriage in North America. She nearly lost her license, and she got death threats. She says Christ may even return as a Muslim, a Wiccan, or an atheist. And for that, she's been called a heretic. We're sitting here in the heart of Parkdale in Toronto, outside this coffee shop. There are drug addicts, street people, prostitutes. Some would call those people sinners. What do you call them?
I call them members of our congregation. They're part of our church, and we are delighted to have a church of and for the poor. And many of them, yes, are in the sex trade. Many of them are selling drugs and buying drugs, and all of them are poor.
You yourself are not a stranger to the streets. You were actually a street kid yourself. Mm-hmm. How did that happen?
Yeah, I was one of those scary people. I used to sell drugs and do drugs. As a 15-year-old, no less, I lived on the street, and my first run-in with the church was to get a free meal. And so I know what it's like to live on the streets, and I know what street people are like. And they're not the bogey men and women that we think they are. They're really just poor.
Your first experience with a Bible was also through drugs.
I hope I don't get persecuted or prosecuted for this, but yes, we used to import LSD from California. It was genuine Osley acid in those days, and we did it in hollowed out Bibles. We never actually read the Bibles, but that was a safe way of getting it across the border.
Did you have any, I don't know, odd feelings about doing that? Did that feel right to you?
No, it felt like a way of making a living to me. It felt like a way of putting food on my table as a kid, and I didn't ever actually have a roof over my head. So that was simply a way of surviving, and people forget that.
Well, you eventually did stop doing some of those things. You got married, had children. You had a very successful career as a headhunter. You drove a fancy car, you had a pool, but it wasn't enough for you. Why?
A different kind of business, yes. It wasn't enough, no. I think that what happens when you do achieve material dreams, when that has been your benchmark and you do achieve those material dreams, you have to really look twice at what your dreams constitute and whether they truly are dreams or just another kind of nightmare. And I was speaking to somebody just the other day about making money, and I said, you really never make enough money. I hear money woes from people who make 6 figures or more, and I hear money woes from people who are on welfare. No one ever makes enough money, and that simple truth hit home.
But come on, Cheri, it must have been hard to give up the fancy car and the pool and the fancy house.
I miss the car occasionally, and I miss the pool occasionally, it's true. But, astoundingly enough, I don't miss the money and I don't miss the business. I have the best job in the world. I really do. It's an impossible job in many ways, but it is the best job in the world. And I certainly never regret. If there is a regret, and regrets are kind of silly, I wish I'd done it earlier. I wish I had left the business world behind earlier and gone back to school and become part of the clergy business earlier. I wish I'd learned to look for God earlier. I wish I had had the benefit that my children have of growing up in a church and having the experience of a spiritual community earlier.
In 1992, something happened that changed your life again. What was that?
Well, my husband at that time died in a bike accident. Actually, was coming home from Ogilvy and Mather, where he worked in advertising, late at night, and spun out and died. And the police came to my door at about 2 in the morning and woke me up to tell me that my husband had died. And I had had a great deal of death before that in my household as well. My parents were already dead. That was partly why I was on the streets as a kid. And just about every relative that had been a close relative had died by then. And this was another in a long line of death. But what it was the first death for my children of note. And you know, I knew at that night that the life that I'd chosen, which was to go through for ordination and to go through as clergy, was the life that I should have chosen. It just confirmed everything that I'd thought up to that point.